Other political news, you have Democrats putting forward legislation to tax AR-15 magazines and rifles at 1,000%. So you have do you want a semi-automatic rifle, just a semi-auto, 1,000% tax. Now, it looks like in terms of statistics, numerically, how many people put this forward this bill, it was a little bit more than 24 House Democrats put forward legislation last Friday that would slap a assault weapon, quote unquote, and high capacity magazines with a 1,000% excise tax. That would change the price of a rifle that usually goes for $500, which good AR-15, you probably get a Smith & Wesson AR-15 for $500, depending on where you live. That would go from $500 to $5,000, which again makes it prohibitively unaffordable for most Americans, as many people are struggling to go paycheck to paycheck. And they say that the bill is they hope it'll curb gun violence across the United States, which at least they're saying the quiet part are out loud in terms of gun confiscation and gun being just hurting the lower class. And think about this for a minute. You saw this with the National Firearms Act of 1934. They're saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to pass this law so that bad guys can't get the guns." Well, I don't know if this is a news flash, but bad guys don't follow the laws. Now, in 1934, they passed the NFA, or the National Firearms Act, that put a $200 tax stamp on special classes of weapons, including short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, machine guns, and later you had AOW, or any other weapon, on also destructive devices known as DD. Now, $200 nowadays doesn't sound too bad. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot of money. That's like a gallon of gas in Chicago. Kidding, it's like maybe 2 gallons. But in terms of pricing, back then, that was, you do the inflation calculator, $200 in 1934 was about $4,200 now. Now, thankfully, there was not a clause in there that adjusted for the cost of inflation. But it meant that if you want to purchase an item, to this day, if you want to buy a suppressor, which is legal in 42 states, you have to go out, you have to pay, of course, you have to pay a sales tax, which is disgusting in and of itself, but you have to pay a $200 tax to the U.S. Treasury Department. And it requires special paperwork, including a photo, extra photo passport, taken of your face, fingerprints. It's a very prohibitive process, and really, the whole thing was done and it just hurt people who can't afford it, which is fascinating to say that they keep arguing that they care about the lower class, but all these laws would do would disarm people who are of the lower class. People who are buku bucks, people who make 100 grand, 200 grand a year, they can still spend 5 grand on a rifle. That's not a very high percentage of their income. If you're barely struggling to make by, if you're making $33,000 a year, which is about the average salary in the United States, or income in the United States, there's no way you can, $5,000 compared to $33,000 a year salary? You can't afford to defend yourself. I find that repugnant and disgusting beyond all belief. I can barely quantify. I should have an extra thesaurus on one of these monitors. Now, this is actually the second time they've introduced this bill. This one was introduced by Representative Don Beyer, a Democrat from Virginia, as well as 24 other House Democrats. Now, this 1,000% tax will be put on any semi-automatic assault weapon, which, if you like the previously introduced bills, defined a semi-automatic rifle or pistol with a fixed magazine of 10 or more rounds and have various features, also known as black rifle scary. Because again, mechanically speaking, pretty much all rifles are semi-automatic. If you look at the most popular rifle in the United States by volume of units sold, it's the AR-15, partially because the patent's expired, or the design patent, so anyone can create a basic AR-15. It was originally made by Eugene Stoner over at Arborlight Company, ironically enough, over in California, decades ago, before the Vietnam War. I believe it was 1950, 60? It's quite some time. And it's actually considered an antique if it's an old enough rifle. But I can't, more than 10 rounds? That's, again, not the standard. The standard capacity magazine that was designed with is a 30-round magazine. And again, we've had these laws before. The 1994 assault weapons ban, the U.S. government had 3 independent studies. It had no effect on crime. It had no major effect on mass shootings. Columbine is probably one of the most prolific, horrifying acts that happened under that law. It didn't stop it. You also have specific states where these are in place as well, which, again, a good use case is the city of Chicago. They've had many of these restrictive laws, and yet nothing's changed in decades. Many would say it was a cultural issue. Another topic for another time, but it looks like, 10 or more rounds if you're a civilian. Government, there's no restrictions, of course, even though the most horrific acts in history have all come from governments. But I moderately digress. Let's dive back in. And in terms, can you fathom a gun that used to cost $2,000 now going for $20,000? And Bayer, the same gentleman, argued last year that this would, quote, curb the epidemic of gun violence. Which, again, it wouldn't. We've gotten to the point where you could print a magazine. So if you have a 3D printer, it's a glorified rectangular box with a spring in it. So anyone with a 3D printer could make one on their own. If you're really desperate, I suppose you can make one out of wood or just take sheet metal and bend it and have a spring in there. It's pretty rudimentary technology in terms of a magazine. We've had the design for well over 100 years. And again, this is saying, oh yeah, it's still legal, but only if you're rich. So not only would it not solve the gun violence, it just actively hurt people of lower socioeconomic income. A lot of people give crap to High Point being a cheap pistol, but at the end of the day, it's one of the most reliable ways to defend your family. It's a sub $200 9mm pistol. That's perhaps the most popular caliber. But again, these laws would just hurt the lower class. And call me old-fashioned, but I think all men were created equal. Everyone should have the opportunity to defend themselves and their family. Now, in terms of the odds of this getting passed, I would say hopefully outlook not so good. And granted, the Supreme Court finally, for the first time in decades, has more people who believe in the Constitution who do not. So, actually, the Supreme Court has already ruled previously that you cannot ban guns in common use. A rifle, which comprises more than 50% of all rifle sales, I would certainly argue from a legal perspective, is well in common use. So, from a legal perspective, I don't know how much grounds it has to stand on. Now, that being said, it's concerning because, of course, every law that is passed by the United States government is backed by a gun held by the United States government. So I just tell people, you should always take all your laws seriously because remember, they enforce them. And when it comes to certain gun laws, it could sometimes be horrific and deadly for people they're enforced against. So depending on where you live, write your political representatives appropriately and make sure you're active in this development. Thank you everyone for taking the time to tune in today. Also, we're trying to get to 3,000 subscribers by the end of August, so I greatly appreciate you taking the time to click that subscribe button. Also, taking the time to like and comment, also greatly appreciate. It really helps the channel grow and develop as we try to make the content and production better and better. Also, don't forget to tell your family, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your friends, heck, even tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe and fight the good fight.